like a ruin, like a
temple cave.
Yeah, like
thing.
a temple in a cave kind of situation.
And inside he found tons of ancient written texts.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
It really sounds amazing. Welcome to Archaeology, books for fun, digging books that aren't drier than dirt. I'm your host, Tristan Harrenstein, and with me as always is my co-host, Barbara Clark.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are doing the next section of Finders Keepers. You may recall from our last episode that I was quite a bit more enthusiastic about this book than Barbara. Let's see if that continues or if we maintain that enthusiasm this time. We are talking about most of section 2 in the book, though this section is as long as the last 2 sections, so we did decide to break off the last chapter, so we're actually doing chapters 5 through 8 instead of 5 through 9, if you're following along. But before we get into the book, a little bit of housekeeping as per usual. We are super excited that we have folks who are listening to us, and we really appreciate that you listen and seem to enjoy it. We would really love to hear from you. If you are so inclined and want to support us a little bit, drop us a comment, leave us a review. If you're really inclined, there will be a donation link if you want to support archaeology and science education in particular and support what we do, then that is a place that you can do that. But we also just really appreciate hearing from you. So please let us know what you think of the episode or if you have any thoughts about what we talk about today. Also, I want to make sure we do a trigger warning for this episode. There is some talk of suicide in particular. If you've been listening a while, you'll know us and know that we don't go on about it, but we wanted to give you all a warning so that you can decide for yourselves if this is an episode you want to listen to. So, without further ado, let's dive into chapter 5, just titled Diggers. This whole section so far from what we read is kind of the stealing history section. There's a lot of overlap going on. Not fully, but we'll get to some of that. So a lot of this is about the collectors and why they do it, what are the problems with that, the general thrust of the whole book, Stealing History in this case. So we start off with an island off of Alaska, technically a part of Alaska, but it is owned by the native tribe in that area. And it is particularly well known for having lots of artifacts and good preservation because of the coal and everything. And so there is actually a lot of digging and selling of these objects by the local people who are direct descendants of the people who made them. And the author kind of talks about, where is the line essentially in this? What is looting and where does it okay, where it is not? He says archaeologists have called this cultural cannibalism.
Some of the times when he says like archaeologists have called it this or called it that, but he doesn't name who he spoke with and stuff. Sometimes I'm like, did he hear it from one person and he's just making a blanket statement, assuming that's how all people feel? I don't know.
Well, and he doesn't say all archaeologists. He said just archaeologists have. It could have been one person at one point, could have been 30 years before the book was written. That is a thing about this section, and we'll get into that a bit more, is I feel like he wrote this book in 2010. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of what he talks about in what we're going to talk about in today's episode is just 10 years out of date at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of my problem with this. It's not that he's necessarily misrepresenting things. I think he's just out of date even for when he wrote it. And I don't necessarily fault him for that, of course, because he's going off of what he has access to, I think, for creating some of this. Well, we'll get into some of that. When it comes to like cultural cannibalism, that's strong words. I don't see many archaeologists using that today at the very least.
Right, yeah.
30 years ago, maybe, right?
Maybe. And we have said in the past that there's like a difference between like generations of archaeologists, you know? And that's probably true of any discipline. But this is interesting because the island is owned by the natives.
So it's legal.
Yeah, and it's their material goods, but they're selling them and trading them with he talks about one artifact that was sold at Christie's of New York for like over $216,000. Mm-hmm. And this made me think a lot of stealing history and the fact that there's a number of questions to ask, right? Do these people that live on this island, what other opportunities are available for them to make a life for themselves, right? And I think he talks a little bit about that.
In this case, he says they see it as a continuation of their culture's ability to adapt to situations.
Which, if that's how they see it, I don't see a problem with that, really. But I do see also the question of the people that are buying these artifacts. Are they paying a fair market value, right? Because, okay, it's sold for $216,000 at Christie's. That means somebody else owned it and then took it to the auction house to be sold. So how much did they buy it and how much did they profit from it? So is this an exploitation of the native islanders?
Right, which isn't really discussed in this context. I think he does discuss it in other contexts in later chapters.
Yeah.
But this time he's not really talking about that. But this time I think he's mostly like, where is the line here?
Yeah. Another thing that was interesting is in this chapter, he talks about how, and again, this might be because it is dated, but how there was an archaeologist who he makes it seem like was unique in the fact that he reached across the aisle to talk to native diggers as well as the dealers. And then it said that her profession had a codified ethics that actively discouraged such conversations. And I don't really know what...
I remember that being a debate 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, but I don't think there was ever like a codified ethics.
I bet there probably was somewhere.
I would be interested in seeing where, because nowadays it's common practice and it's encouraged. Like, you're supposed to talk. I mean, even
with some ethical caution.
Well, yeah, but like even when you did CRM in Florida, one of the things that they were adamant about is talking to the locals, and a lot of times those were collectors or, somebody. And the idea was at least you talk to somebody local, at least they may have information that could be useful. And if they did have a collection, at least now it's known about, you know? So, I mean, it's a weird situation. And it's a gray area. And I think that's why it's so hard to find that line.
And remember, for us, so much of it is about context. And when it's in these collections, does not have that context. And so it's hard for us to find value in it. There are people that study these things and have found that made it work for them, but it is a lot more tenuous than actually excavating the thing.
Yeah, and it's, what is your research question? There might be some research questions where you can look at things out of context and at least get some idea, maybe utilizing multiple collections and stuff. I did like the fact that in this chapter, he talks about the folks that fly over sites, and then he actually gives tail numbers for their planes or their helicopters. I can't remember. And I was like, man, that's bold, especially after saying these people hire hitmen.
Yeah. Yeah. And then on the extension of who has rights to these things, we move on to a town in southeast Utah that has kind of at least a few generations of collection with them. And of course, as you would expect, it started off as just kind of a social thing, and then it's turned into more of a money thing. Actually, and this is interesting to me because to me it's like you have no claim to these objects. This town doesn't. But we had some similar or different opinions about the town in Stealing History. I forget the name right now.
Yeah, in Peru, yeah.
Yeah, in Peru, because there was the whole, they are not descendants of these people. They don't have any actual claim to them. And it's not necessarily that we disagreed, but we kind of had a point that hey, at some point, even if they're not actually descended from the people who made these things, at some point, if they believe they are, then it kind of becomes a certain level of reality.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the same thing here, but in this case, I'm opposed to this group of people. In that case, I was a little more conflicted, and I'm not entirely sure why.
I think some of it is the folks here in Utah that are collecting are white.
Yep.
And the people that were collecting in Peru were probably at least more closely related.
That I'm unclear on that situation. I'm sure there was some mix of things, although they made the point in Peru that this town hadn't been there that long, so people had moved into the area. That doesn't mean they're not descended from the group still. So
yeah, these folks in Utah are most definitely
they have
not.
no descendant.
Yeah,
that is true. But I don't hate necessarily the exploration of where is that line. In this case, the author is very much saying they're over the line.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. That's one thing I appreciate about this author is he could be making excuses for the looting, but he doesn't. He tries to understand it, but he's clearly opposed to it. And I like that a lot.
And it's interesting because he brings up a lot of stuff we've talked about in the past. The connection to drug use and collecting is explored in this chapter. I know there's been like multiple articles written on it. I know we've discussed it before, so we don't have to go in detail, but there is a definite connection between that and meth, unfortunately. And he talks a little bit about that. And it was interesting to me being a Florida archaeologist when he was going back to the helicopters and how they would fly over these sites. And I tried to remember where I was going with that when we talked about it, but they would use the tail rotors to kind of blow away like surface dirt and stuff to get at the artifacts. And it reminded me of what people do here in Florida at the rivers. They use those underwater scooters and they flip them around and use the propeller to blast away sections of the river. And then they're like, oh, look, I found this on the surface.
Right.
You know, so it's interesting how, unfortunately, people are kind of creative when it comes to their collecting.
Right. And destructive more than just the archaeology in these cases too.
Well, yeah. And I know there's been situations where people have been fined or like arrested for not only the archaeological damage, but also the environmental damage as well.
So this town has a long history of collecting. This came to a head in the 80s when there was some legal busts and some shady characters involved. Kind of familiar, actually, to dealing history in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of them in the 80s kind of either got a slap on the wrist or were kind of just sent on their way. And I know, I mean, there's been people will say, oh, that was in the 80s. That was so long ago. And it's not. And there have been laws on the book protecting archaeology since 1906, right? Yep. And this is one of the issues, like so often what we see is law enforcement either doesn't really know the laws that exist. And it's really, I mean, you can make the argument they have so much on their plate and they are also usually underfunded and all that stuff and understaffed, especially in like more rural areas. So they have bigger concerns. But with the connection with meth and the dangerous things that can happen, like killing people, apparently, it is something to be kind of taken seriously. But I think oftentimes what we find is law enforcement either doesn't know the laws or they don't have the ability to enforce these laws, or they haven't been enforcing these laws. And then when they start to enforce the laws, it becomes an issue.
Yeah, people feel
kind of betrayed almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they say in here, like, we've been doing this for generations. Why is it all of a sudden a problem? Well, you've been breaking the law for generations.
Right. And they just had to build the evidence to prove it.
Yeah.
So after these busts, it doesn't stop people from doing things, but it does mean people just got a little more smart about it. So harder to track down, essentially. And in one case, this comes to a head in 2009 once again. And this is particularly interesting to me because I was out there during this time period. I was working out west, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, about 2008 to 2010. And so in 2009, this was like fresh news. And essentially 26 people were arrested, and some of them were very prominent individuals. And sadly, in the end, several of them committed suicide, which is not great. Yeah. We don't want that. We don't feel like, they broke the law, they should face consequences, but it shouldn't be a death sentence.
Yeah.
And I think, and people are like, well, then you shouldn't be enforcing this law. That's garbage reason to not do it. But I think we should be expecting law enforcement to put people on suicide watch in these situations then to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Yeah. And yeah, it's not a great situation all around. I mean, obviously you shouldn't break the rules. And if you do decide to break the rules, you are putting yourself in a situation where you might have to face the consequences. But not only are these people, their lives lost, but like they have families and loved ones and friends and stuff that care about them. So it's just not a great situation all around.
Right.
And we had something similar happen in Florida back in 2012 and 2013. Operation Timucua, as it was called. It was a similar bust, very similar, a lot of parallels, including, unfortunately, suicide. But the Florida Wildlife Commission and the Department of State, which is the Division of Historical Resources under them. They partnered for like 2 years on this undercover sting. They even had like undercover agents going to artifact sales and meeting with these people in their private homes and things. And it resulted in over 400 felonies. Unfortunately, none of them stuck. And for 13 individuals in Florida and Georgia. And it was everything from like looting on state lands, destroying, environmentally sensitive areas, stealing, all sorts of stuff, but none of them stuck. And one of the gentlemen did, unfortunately, lose his life. So it's unfortunate. And again, it's one of those situations where it's like, there's no good answer. But part of me is like, if law enforcement would just have taken this stuff seriously from the very beginning, people might know not to do it. But then again, a lot of these people go back and seem to do it anyways. Even the people that face these felony charges in Florida, you can go online and they're still active.
They got away with it.
Yeah.
Well, and a big part of the problem I know law enforcement has is it's incredibly difficult to build a case.
It is, yeah.
And then to get it to stick, like you said, because it can do all that work and sometimes nothing happens.
Yeah, and some of these folks, a lot of them even got their artifacts back because it's hard to tell where the artifacts came from. In some cases, these folks were like taking photos of the artifact in front of the state park sign in which they stole the artifact. Right. And that was, pretty easy to identify, but a lot of these other things weren't.
And I know, at least in the case of the Utah situation, you think, oh, they're digging sites. No, they were digging burials.
Yeah.
Like, actually, I had the state archaeologist tell me personally, this would have been about 2010, one of the accounts of them digging was they found a infant wrapped in a blanket, and they just took one edge of that blanket, went whoop, and scattered the remains everywhere. And like, as the author points out here, what were good people doing digging graves? Yeah.
It's really upsetting. And then for it to be an infant is just even more so.
Yep. Well, and then it be so blatantly disrespected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even as archaeologists, if we were to study a burial, there are so many steps. And even then, a lot of times we just leave them be.
We don't anymore.
Right. It wasn't always that way. That's true. That's fair.
To be clear, anymore, we don't mess with a burial unless it needs to be moved is when it would be excavated. But otherwise, we leave it alone.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly, especially finding human remains in a project stops the project.
Yep.
It'll take a while for it to get going again, if it does.
Yep. And that's how it should be.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, but one of the points here that the author makes, and he's not wrong, is that the people that were arrested in these situations aren't the biggest problem. They aren't the source of the problem. They're just the ones out there doing it and the ones getting caught.
Yep.
And that leads us into the next chapter. This one actually has a lot of overlap, very direct overlap with stealing history.
Yeah, and I think reading Stealing History and then reading this, it really works well together. So if you are reading along and you haven't listened to those episodes or read that book, if you're a reader, I would encourage you to do so.
Yep. So this one is all about the artifact market, essentially. And he describes some situations. In this case, he's talking about a town in Guatemala, or a region in Guatemala, where it was really hot for a while and they're digging and looting. The author says it's declined because there's nothing left. I strongly suspect it's declined because the market got flooded and devalued the objects.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
That's more likely to me.
And, also you keep in mind, like, when people are looting sites, they're looking for, like, the very ornate, valuable objects. And just like today, people didn't have as many of those objects as they do the everyday things that they were utilizing. And while archaeologists see value in those, not monetary value, but value as in information, the people digging for, monetary value they're just going to toss those things aside.
But this is where he starts to talk about how museums are culpable in this, particularly, once again, as we saw in Stealing History, it seems to almost universally be art museums that are the problem.
Yeah, which, again, definitely go back and listen to those episodes because we talk a lot about that, and it's not something I had ever thought about until I read that book.
In this case, he actually tells one story that we had in Stealing History about two stelae that ended up at the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Kimball Art Museum. And this book actually adds to the situation the additional piece where the Kimball Art Museum created an replica and allowed it to return to Guatemala. They would not give back the original. They made them a copy.
Yeah, which...
That's bullshit.
Yeah.
Beep. I'm gonna bleep that, but it's worth calling that out.
Like the copy should have been at the museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you need it? Why would you need the actual thing there?
Yeah. And you can't even justify that for like, oh, I need to study the real thing, because in this day and age with the technology we have available, the replica will be just as good, or can be just as good as the original.
And they've had it for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. If you haven't studied it yet, you can go to Guatemala and study it.
We talk about a man named Thomas Hoving, actually, which is also, he is mentioned in Stealing History.
Stealing History, yep.
Here we get a lot more detail about him, though. He's not a nice guy.
No.
So essentially, he's a collector that got himself set up as the director of Metropolitan Museum of Art, and was for a long time knowingly buying looted things, or didn't care, and eventually he was one of the ones that championed the UNESCO law that put anti-smuggling treaty basically in 1970, but he knew how to work this. He didn't actually care about it. It was just convenient for him, and he just saw the way things were going, to the point where he knew Italy was about to sign it, and so he intentionally, it really feels like, well, allegedly intentionally, let's say that, bought something that, in his words, felt like it might be looted.
Yeah. Which, if you felt like it might be looted, it's been looted.
Right.
As a museum director, like, there should be no doubt in your mind where these artifacts came from. And if there is, you shouldn't have them.
Yes. And the author actually asks him about that, and he gets kind of touchy.
Yeah.
And basically, in Hoving's mind, according to the author here, because he believed and didn't know, he was ethically in the clear. It's like,
that's not how that works.
You're totally not, dude. I do really like that the author here just straight up calls him out. He straight up says, when Hoving started working to stop the illegal trade, when it suited him, apparently, like, straight up calls him out. It's like, he's only doing it for his own purposes here. He does not have any greater ideals. He hasn't changed his tune at all.
And it seems like the way a lot of these, like, when certain countries create laws regarding looting or looted objects, it seems like the objects that were looted prior to that law being enacted can kind of circulate most of the times. It seems like, I'm sure there are examples where that's not the case. So to me, that's like so complicated,
right?
Because you have to be able to prove when that object was originally looted. It's so weird to me to think.
Right.
Like,
well, and now it's very much in collectors and dealers' interest to destroy the provenience of the context for where it came from as much as possible.
Yeah. And I also thought it was funny because Hoving started pointing the finger at other museums, including the Getty.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, when you start pointing the fingers at other people, you did wrong.
Well, I mean,
he knows he did wrong.
He could have had a change of heart, but we can tell he didn't.
No, it was more like, look over there.
Yeah. Or he was just having fun causing problems for other people, basically.
Yeah.
Then we talk a little bit about some of the dealers. One of them is a big time dealer in New York who has gone legitimate ? At least he puts a lot of effort into looking like he's following the laws, is what it seems like is presented here. Has run afoul of them still, but from their point of view, I guess I can see they're not going to spend more than the object is worth on investigating the legitimacy of the object. I still don't like it.
Yeah.
It's still gross, but that's capitalism. So.
Yep. And I'm still just amazed at the auction houses and what I feel is their responsibility in this issue. And it blows my mind because they're essentially becoming dealers as well, and not really seeming to care where these artifacts came from. And we read in Stealing History how even if there is paperwork, how easy it is to fake that stuff.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Yep. And then we move on to small-time dealer. So the point kind of here is that the smaller dealers don't have the resources to basically protect themselves in the same way that big-time dealers do.
Mm-hmm.
And so this couple is running one in California, and it eventually finds out, and they were donating lots of stuff to museums.
Mm-hmm.
And it found out they are actually dealing in stolen things, and they probably, allegedly knew it. Part of this mess is actually an archaeologist who gets mixed up in this because it's a little unclear, because she said she assessed one thing for them via email once.
But it sounds like maybe her...
But they have multiple emails, but maybe her her signature was stolen and faked.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I still don't know what an archaeologist is doing pricing an artifact.
That's my thing. Like multiple organizations that we are members of, that is like explicitly outlined in their code of ethics that you do not do that.
Right. So as far as did she do wrong, I don't have a ton of sympathy. Unfortunately, they decided she was a flight risk and wouldn't let her post bail, so she was in prison, and then her health failed and she died. Which, once again, this shouldn't be a death sentence, so that's not okay. It's also not okay that of all the people supposedly involved in this, she's the only one that suffered for it.
Right.
That's not okay.
Yeah.
Whether or not, I don't know if she was guilty or not, it seems very suspect, but she should, like, the fact that the rest of them got off without any consequences is not all right.
Yeah. It was,
It's a sad story.
It's a sad story, and it's a really, really complicated issue.
And it really, this is feeling a lot like stealing history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often a lot of unhappy stories. So, moving on to chapter 7, titled A History of Urges, we start off with good old Thomas Bruce, the Earl of Eglin. And if you recall from Stealing History, this is the guy that basically looted a whole structure from a Greek island from Greece,
Yeah.
and shipped it back to the UK and lost some of it because the ship sank. And really not okay. But he's kind of like an early case of this large-scale looting, essentially. Anyway, so yeah, this book references these once again. But this chapter is mostly about a case in China in the 1900s. And so essentially a monk comes across I think kind of a cave.
Yeah, it was like a ruin, like a
temple cave.
Yeah, like
thing.
a temple in a cave kind of situation.
And inside he found tons of ancient written texts.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
It really sounds amazing. And especially to him, because there's I'm not been familiar with this person, but I kind of want to look him up now. Xuanzang, who is a scholar and a monk like a millennia ago or something like that, who actually traveled around exploring how different people worshipped and wrote them down and recorded them. So some of these documents actually have his signature on it, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I can see how that'd be so important. So through various things, he is tasked with taking care of this space by the government. And then in comes R.L. Stein, who is there for the British Museum.
Shocker.
Right? And this guy is Indiana Jones.
Yes.
As far as his view on what archaeology is and what we do with the things that are excavated.
And it was around this time, I love this quote in the book. It said, to put into context what was kind of happening at the time, the world was being taken apart and put back together in England.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, ugh. And more, I would even say put back together at the British Museum.
Right. And so essentially this guy schmoozes the monk and gets permission to take nearly all of the texts. It's a little unclear if this was meant, if it was purely self-serving, kind of like what everyone felt about it. The author does kind of like say, we don't really quite know all the ins and outs of how this was, but the result is it was all taken to England and it is still there, at least as of 2010 when the book was written. The R.L. Stein is not favorably viewed in China for obvious reasons.
Yeah, he's pretty much vilified.
Right. And then the author does a whole bunch of what ifs that I don't find particularly convincing. So essentially, the argument here is if he hadn't taken them, they would have been looted, or they would have been taken by the government and stored somewhere, and those would have been lost. Or
it wouldn't have been adequate storage.
Because, and in this case, because of like historical upheaval and that kind of a thing. Honestly, I don't find these very interesting or convincing.
And also, it doesn't matter. They belong to China.
Right. So that is where I get into this. And this is when we talk to people who've been collecting, our approach is not you did wrong. It's more, what do we do next time? What happens next?
Yeah.
And so what happens next is, why aren't you giving these back to China?
Right.
Right. Whether or not they were saved because of these actions, the British Museum does not have a right to them.
Yeah. And, like you said, it's all these what ifs. You don't know anything for certain. And it also comes across as a little
condescending.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I was trying to come up with the right word. Yes, because you're saying that another country, another entity can take better care of China's cultural material than China. That sounds a lot like what happened here in the US with Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And, we can take better care of your things and your culture and heck, even your children than you can.
And whether or not, and whether or not you can argue in this case that you did, I'm more concerned with, China can take care of these things now. If you say that it wasn't possible then, it is not the case now.
Right. So give them back.
Give them back.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm still on board with these chapters. I have plenty of things I don't agree with, but I'm enjoying the book as a whole. And then we have chapter 8, which, to be clear, I still enjoy the book, but this chapter has a lot of problems. And I think this chapter feels very much like a kind of chapter, like I said, that was out of date 10 years when it was written 15 years ago. So, in 2000, a lot of this would have been out of date, but it feels really out of date now.
Yeah.
And so this is more about archaeology and ethics. And he says it's becoming more about relations among people than about things, which, yes. It's presented as though that's not a good thing. It's like, no, that's a good thing.
Yes, that was one of my issues. Like, the things are a tool for us to learn about the people. That is our goal.
And I get it from his point of view. The things are a emotional connection to the past and to the people. So he is more focused on the things in a much healthier way than most people are, but it's still a focus on the things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you're trying to represent archaeology, you need to acknowledge that archaeology is not about the things.
Right. And I don't know that the author maybe he does understand that, but just didn't fit the narrative for this book or what. But first of all, archaeology is never actually really, at least thus far, has not been defined.
Yeah.
And
they do kind of in this one, but
yeah, kind of.
We'll get to that.
But I just don't know that the author really understands what the purpose of archaeology is. I think he does think it's just about the things, at least the way it's presented in this book.
I don't think so. I think he understands archaeology is not about the things, but I think to him, the things are what matters. Because he doesn't necessarily see the results of the archaeology, I think, is possibly what's going on here. And he makes a good cases for some of the times the things mattering, like we connect with through our senses with the past and that kind of a thing. And he's built up like the location and the thing are both part of that connection to the people who left it. And so it's okay, but it's just, and a lot of what he says here, it's hard to say this is wrong. It's more like it's a little out of date, or if it's being presented as too cut and dry some of the times. Like the way he talks about how archaeology is at odds with looters. He makes it sound like we spend every waking moment fighting looting.
I know.
Right. And that's not what's going on.
Like how he talks about the provenience of sellable artifacts is equated with bad science. And he kind of makes this sound like it's a horrible thing. Like, what does he say? The notoriously bad provenience of sellable artifacts is equated with bad science. And any involvement with it, such as helping date or even price a dubious piece as Roxanne Brown did allegedly, is seen as reinforcing a market that wrecks the archaeological record.
Right.
Like, well, yes.
But he's also basically argued that point throughout the book up to here.
Yeah.
So I don't quite understand, unless he's just presenting this point of view and it's not necessarily him making this argument. That's all I can really figure out there.
Yeah.
Again, he seems to forget, archaeology employ the record for their own ends. He keeps forgetting that he said himself, archaeology is not for personal gain.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say that archaeology is always above board and ethically perfect either. We can certainly talk about where some ethical failings still are today, but these are not them.
Right. Well, and today, in our very imperfect system, at least there's tribal consultation and things like that. What do you want done with it? How do you want us to handle this? You don't want us to dig at this site, or, whatever it is, like, it's not perfect by any means.
No.
There's still a lot of room for improvement. But again, I go back to that we're trying to clean up a war as it's being fought, right?
Right.
We've created a mess and we're doing the best we can. But the whole saving artifacts for another culture that might go extinct.
Not for them, right?
But for
right,
us
to look at and be like, wow, they were neat, essentially.
Yeah, part of the landscape is how European folks often view
that
Native
whole
Americans.
naturalists, natural sciences and stuff, it's very dated.
So this is a thing that existed when the author wrote this book, but it was a fairly new thing, and that is community archaeology.
Yeah.
And that changes a lot of this chapter. So in the last 15 years especially, there's been more and more push towards when we are excavating a site that has living cultural descendants, that they dictate what questions are even asked.
Yeah.
So we don't even say, hey, lucky you, we're doing this for you. It's like, hey, we're doing these excavations. What do you want to know?
Yeah.
So it's really to everyone's benefit, but particularly to the descendants. And this is a thing we talked about too, is archaeologists often still today forget that what we do matters to people living now.
Right.
It's not just a thing isolated in the past.
And it has the potential to serve the communities in which the existing communities descended from the ones that we're studying. Like there's things that we can learn that can help them, if nothing else, feel a sense of connection to their ancestry, So yeah. And some of the discussion about NAGPRA in this chapter is interesting.
It's not all bad. He does talk about some legitimate problems museums were having complying just because of staff and funding and everything. But he does talk about while the backlash has denied archaeologists permission to analyze human remains they dug themselves, battling over access to the likes of Washington State's Ken McMahon with all legal force they can muster. It's as if the fact that you dug it up gives you rights to it. That bothers me there, because it doesn't. You dug it up doesn't mean you give any rights to it. And then there's actually one archaeologist saying NAGPRA is just a big pain in the butt. That, again, was 10 years out of date when he wrote this. But it was a mentality of a certain generation of archaeologists.
Yeah. And also it's one of those situations, and again, where I was like, okay, it is one archaeologist and their opinion, but the way he presents it, I don't want the readers to think that that's how all archaeologists felt at the time or feel now. And
in the 80s and 90s, I think that may have been a fairly common opinion.
Right.
But it certainly is not now.
Right. I've never heard
Nobody says
complain
that
about NAGPRA. Like, in fact, most archaeologists are glad it exists, respect it, and some even want to see it stronger.
I think many want to see it stronger still.
I mean, they recognize it's an imperfect law and an imperfect system. And,
it's a first
what
attempt
can we
at making
do to make it better?
Yeah, exactly. So, interesting, though.
Yeah.
He digs with a team in Arizona a little bit. He's very, very poetic about the process. It's actually a pretty decent description of archaeological excavation.
I've never heard it referred to as a strip tease before.
Yeah, that was weird. Also, have you ever heard, some archaeologists can't resist going beyond the unit boundaries?
That was interesting to me because I have never encountered that.
I've also never encountered the term deep sweepers.
Yes, that was something else. I was like, I gotta ask Tristan because maybe this is an out west thing.
No, I've never heard of that before in my life.
Okay, yeah. But I was just like, I've never had anybody I was doing CRM from like 2004 to 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And
you don't have time to do that when you're doing CRM.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, okay, what's next? Where are we going? Let's do this.
Well, and your goal is so different because you are typically trying to get this done because this stuff is protected for some kind of construction.
Yeah.
If you go outside that area, it's not under threat. You don't need to be messing with it.
Right. Yeah. So, that's somebody else's project for when that parcel is being developed or whatever.
And that's actually, someone does here talk about how it's more, he says it's like it's a new thing, how we don't want to mess with stuff unless we need to. Again, 10 years out of date in 2010.
Yeah.
They complain about too many artifacts, particularly chicken bones and fire-cracked rock. Fire-cracked rock is the worst artifact.
When I read that, I was like, oh, Tristan's going to have something to say.
It's the worst artifact. This is a thing we've been dealing with for a while. We don't collect every single brick fragment from a site. We collect a sample of these things.
Yep.
This is something that's, this is not a new problem we're trying to figure out now, how to not collect everything.
But he talks about the curation crisis, and that is a real thing, and that still is a real thing.
It is.
Every artifact repository is busting at the seams, and like here in the state of Florida, they're actually constructing a new one that's going to be bigger because we need it. And part of that is because of the laws we enacted, essentially, and the way they're written. So it's a very interesting issue. So it was interesting to read that they were even referring to it as a curation crisis, back in probably 20 years ago.
Right. He does acknowledge that, well, archaeologists view sites as a non-renewable resource. I don't know how you would argue otherwise, really. But he says, we admit it actually destroys the in-the-ground record by removing it, something pot hunters are frequently accused of. Like, there's no admitting anything. We know it and we'll tell people.
And that's why we do it. Like, that's why we excavate the way we do. That's the difference between pot hunters and archaeologists, is we are making strong documentation because we know we're destroying it.
And he immediately follows up with what we document. That's the difference. But I don't appreciate the unnecessary conflation with the two in this context, even though it was like immediately filled out. Like, that was unnecessary.
There's so many differences too.
Yeah.
That's not the only one.
So yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff like this is not accurate today. It's not a complete understanding of archaeology. It's much better than a lot of things. It's like Lost City of the Monkey God. It's a more complete understanding than that. But that was almost more pure in its lack of understanding.
Well, and he talks about like Stein, for example, and then also, we don't have to go into detail, but another archaeologist who early on was excavating Mesa Verde. And he talks about how attempting to separate themselves from their treasure hunting origins going back before Nordiskold, I apologize, it's a Scandinavian last name, and Stein, they have spruced up their profession with rigorous methodology focusing on comparative studies and literature reviews more than on straightforward excavations. But again, it's the tone. It's like, we're not trying to separate ourselves from treasure hunters.
We're not doing it to separate ourselves.
Right, exactly. Like, we are separate.
We are trying to be better.
Yes.
Not because of treasure hunters, not because of PR.
Right.
We are just trying to be better.
Yeah. So like sometimes the tone in this book, even though I think he takes the side,
he makes it sound like it's cynical.
Yes.
And it's not.
Yes. We're just trying to be a good scientist and good stewards of the sites that we study and the material goods that we end up collecting. Like, we're just trying to be good stewards.
And to have public benefit for what we do.
Yeah.
Like, I did like how one archaeologist apparently said, it's kind of strange that all we're doing here is digging up dead people's things, as if that's not a thing that every archaeologist has heard before. He says everyone sat there silently, and probably everyone was embarrassed because everyone's like, yeah, I've heard that for
or like, 10
years. We know.
Yeah.
It's not a revelation. He does not like remote sensing.
That whole thing about like tech.
And it's contradictory too. And he says it, but then he doesn't deal with it.
Well, and it also sounds like, I think at this point he's talking to another archaeologist who also is like kind of anti-tech.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Because it sounds like sometimes he was just talking to like the bitter old hats.
Well, at the end, I want to talk about that guy at the end, and actually next after this. But yeah, it's so weird to me because he's presenting remote sensing like GPR, LiDAR, like we talked about before, as though those things are going to eliminate the need to excavate, which in 15 years since, that's never once been the case, other than we know there's nothing there.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's done that. But he's also spent most of the book complaining about how when you remove things from their place, something is lost.
Yeah.
And so, but now he's complaining about not having the things to be the connection. Like, you're contradicting yourself here. And that's what bothers me.
Something else that kind of blew my mind and definitely dated is, quote, he wondered how archaeologists could expect the public to appreciate and preserve these things when they were described as little more than sterile scientific commodities. I was like, oh, and it made me think about how your vignette about the ancient dog turd.
Yeah.
I was like, it's the story. The story is what makes these things interesting. But I digress.
So the last bit I wanted to talk about a little bit is he's talking with a retired archaeologist by the name of Bruce Anderson, was apparently mostly active in the 70s and 80s. I knew we were in a little bit of trouble to start with because like one of the things he showed was how his trowel was worn down to a nub, and like, big whoop, 10 years will do that.
Yeah. I remember thinking like, cool story.
Yeah.
We all have like 5 of those.
Yeah, and then he says the scientific commodities quote, like, and I noted, boy, he does sound old.
Right? It just came off as like bitter old dude.
Right. He's found, oh, this was rich. So he was active in the 70s and 80s. So when we did our degrees, we were required to read a lot of theory papers and such. I assume you did too.
Oh, yes.
A lot of those come from the 70s and 80s when a lot of this was like theory was kind of starting.
Yeah.
They are impenetrable. And here he says he finds archaeology papers today to be nearly impossible for even him to decipher. Like, that's the exact opposite of the situation. Like,
Yeah.
they're not very fun to read because that's not what they're for, but everyone can understand them.
Right.
You got to have a little knowledge. To be fair, like jargon and stuff is definitely going to come into play there. And here, well, let's see, one more big quote from him. So this is from the book. This is the conversation between the two of them. They seem to be saying that archaeology is not about treasure hunting, but about the meticulous assembly of data, a vacuum sweeping the countryside of information. He said that they were forgetting the reason for archaeology in the first place. What is that reason? We wanted to find out what was in the ground, what culture groups were physically made of, he said. When we were digging, there wasn't a question about what we were doing, and we didn't have to put on these goddamn airs. And like, this guy was out of date in 1970. Like, he is talking about culture or history. He is not talking about archaeology in the 70s and 80s here.
Yeah.
Who were these people? That is culture history stuff.
Yeah.
He was out of date in the 70s and 80s, and he really feels like he's just bitter because he's obsolete now and didn't keep up.
Yeah. Well, and like, it's the tone and just, yeah, the bitterness. It's very strange.
And it's strange that it's presented so unquestionably in this book.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
if he could have presented this and then talked about it. Some of these things I could see, again, if we view this as 10 years out of date in 2010, some of these things are not obviously out of date, right?
Right.
They were in progress. A lot of them were, or just starting, a lot of them were. But if you're not deeply involved in the discipline, you may not know these things. We get a little bit of Indiana Jones with That Belongs in a Museum brings out throughout the discipline. I decided to not take that as meant to be too literally. It's more of a...
I mean, we say that as a joke.
We do.
You know, like...
Because it's such
so stupid.
It's so stupid, and it's such a narrow understanding of it.
Yeah.
And then we end with archaeologists pull out the pot that he's been watching them excavate, and there's a root that's grown around it and held it, and they cut out the root, and he ends with, "They're in love, the root in the jar. Can't you see?"
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I lost patience with that.
Yeah. Like I said, it comes off a little flowery. I don't know, a little too whimsical. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's value in your emotions and understanding your emotions, and that's what a lot of what he's done so far.
Yeah.
But also he kind of calls himself out, understanding it's unreasonable, even as he writes that.
Yeah.
But still.
Well, I think he was like trying to like end because I've noticed he tries to end most of the chapters kind of like almost poetically.
Yeah.
And I think that was his attempt for this chapter, and it just didn't quite hit the mark.
Didn't land for us. Yeah. So that one didn't work. And so there's our chapters for this episode. How are you feeling, Barbara?
I'm enjoying the book. Like, it's not a bad read. I enjoy reading it, but there's a lot of little things I think that I find issue with, and they're starting to add up.
Adding up is fair.
Yeah.
I find also that I'm very much still enjoying the book. Unlike some authors where I just got angry with what they were saying, I'm enjoying disagreeing with some of what he's saying.
Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate the fact too that he is pondering, like he doesn't...
A lot of times he's not presenting answers.
Yeah.
That's where I have more issues with this last chapter in particular, is because there was more presenting answers than just trying to figure it out himself.
Well, and like the tone, I think bothered me a little bit. And
it was just kind of lacking in understanding, in nuanced understanding, I think.
Yes. I mean, we're not trying to not be treasure hunters. Like,
right. It's not just to distinguish ourselves from treasure hunters. Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of the way it came off. And I also sometimes wonder about these archaeologists he's been interviewing. I'm like, who were you talking to? And do they have a therapist?
Some of them for sure. Some of them seem pretty well grounded.
Yeah. I'm like, do you need help?
Well, this has been a trip so far. I'm really enjoying this journey. I'm really excited to see where this goes next time.
Yeah, I'm excited about the next chapter.
Yeah,
specifically about salvage archaeology or cultural resource management.
That's actually a thing that's been going on a lot with this book so far, as he talks about archaeology that's done for research, whereas most archaeology is done because if you don't do it, it's going to be destroyed.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see where that takes us.
Yep, that'll be interesting. And then we have 2 more sections to get through as well. So look forward to that next time. I sure am, and we'll see you then.
All right, happy reading, everybody.
Archaeology Books for Fun is brought to you by the Florida Public Archaeology Network, a program of the University of West Florida. You can find out more about archaeology and about FPAN at fpan.us. We appreciate any feedback, so if you're listening to us as a podcast, please leave us a review, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.